And now let's move on to Q&A.
So let's start from this one. How do you collaborate with professionals from non-GIS backgrounds?
Um, I can definitely try to answer this question because, for example, for my team is composed of software developers and the product engineers. So all of the
Mhm.
software developers don't come from a geospatial background. So they're experts in terms of coding and like software developing. So that's why we have product engineers to work with them on like the geospatial context because at the end of the day, it is a geospatial software. So therefore,
Mhm.
I think one key difference is as a product engineer, you are expected to be very fluent in all 3D workflows for my 3D team. But as a software developer, you are most likely specialized in terms of one feature. For example, there's developer only focused on the 3D tiles, or their developer only focuses on geometry renderings. But as a PE, you have to be very fluent with this diverse workflows. So I think for that, when you work with a non geospatial background colleague, you have to very able to be very well on explaining the workflows, especially the user workflow or user research or the UI designs. So, and a lot of communications and help the developers to understand the design and the new feature implementation. And a lot of our developers actually don't work on in ArcGIS Pro. They only work on the development. They don't really have a UI. So that's one thing as a PE, you have to be able to translate very well from the coding end to a UI side of the ArcGIS Pro interface. So I would say that's something. As a PE at Esri, it's a day-to-day interaction with non-geospatial background folks.
Yeah, I might add, I think I agree with what Phyllis said, for sure. Explaining things clearly and all of that is incredibly important. And then I guess what I was thinking of is sort of the opposite to explaining, which would be asking the person who's less familiar with GIS that you're working with questions
Mhm.
about what they're looking for, because I think that when I have my first experiences working with people who don't have experience with GIS, or often I was, like the GIS intern in a team where nobody else knew GIS. They're like, oh, let's just hire an intern and she'll do it for us. And like I had instances where, I had a supervisor say like, oh, can you draw us a map? And she'd hand me like a paper and a pencil. And I'm like, there's tools for this. It doesn't have to be this complicated. And so it's a lot of instances like that where it's like, okay, she maybe had a certain understanding of what GIS is, and she had a certain understanding of like how a spatial product could help solve her problem, but that was a really different perspective than what I had. And so I think now I often go into it with questions like, who is the audience? What is the purpose of what we're building? What is the scope? Because maybe, if I'm given a certain task, I might say, oh, well, this would be a really great thing to map out at a national level, and that person maybe only needs to understand the answer for that particular community or state or whatever subset of a population. So I don't think I want to overwhelm anybody with questions ever, but I try to go into a project with, a set of core questions, often about
Mhm.
audience, scope, purpose, whatever, to really get at the root of what they want. And then I can go in and use like my specific GIS knowledge to suggest things that they might not be aware of that are actually helpful to them, as opposed to me doing things they're not aware of that are not helpful to them. So it takes some time to sort of figure out what those questions are. I think that was really the hard part for me, but I think with more experience working with non GIS folks, it gets a bit easier to figure out what those essential questions are.
Yeah, I try to tell my students, I'm like, what's the objective and who's the audience? And if you know that and you have a willingness to make a quick elevator pitch as to what GIS is, I find a lot of people are incredibly responsive because most people don't know what GIS is.
Thank you, Laurie, and thank you for this entire for answering that question. So I think this has been a wonderful session, and I think I learned a ton, and I hope everyone here feels a similar way. Well, I wish we could keep this conversation going, but we have to wrap up. Before we close, I just wanted to take a moment and say that this is exactly why conversations like this matter, because women in GIS are doing incredible work across every part of this field. And tonight we had the chance to hear from a few of them. We hope this webinar have created space for these stories to be shared and celebrated, and for everyone here to feel a little bit more connected to this community. So thank you to our panelists, Phyllis, Lori, and Tyler, for sharing your time and experiences. And thank you all for joining us and being part of this conversation. We wish you all the best wherever your GIS journey takes you, and we hope to see you in our next webinar. Thank you, everybody.